Welcome, soul brothers and sisters. This one is an interesting one from a follower, and I'm going to get immediately into this. And this is about how do we deal with the pain of the past that comes into relationship, and how do we both work through that when one of us is putting in more effort and the other one doesn't seem to be putting in as much effort. So let me get into this. I'm going to break this down. There's quite a lot here. Okay, so I've been following your stuff for a little bit now and really love what you're doing with the male community. Thank you. My man is very rough around the edges and has quite of a rough history with aggressive parents, no love in the home, etc. Our relationship is suffering and we have a very hard time communicating. I feel like I'm trying hard to work on myself, to let go of my own bad patterns, but I don't see an effort on his side in terms of him working on himself so we as a couple can thrive. What are tips to get across to a man who seems stagnant? We both want this to work, but I feel like we're getting to a tipping point. We have 2 kids as well. There's a lot of blame going on, if that helps. Well, firstly, let me commend you both for being willing to get into the relationship and to also be in the relationship and allow the relationship to grow. That can also be quite challenging in and of itself, especially when there are children involved. And so let me address the roughness around the edges. Let me address the difficult history and the aggressive parents. And it's something that, and not having love in the home, for me, I can really relate to this because I didn't have love in the home and I had love in the home. And that was coupled with having aggressive parents, particularly a father, quite violent upbringing, abusive, emotionally abusive, psychologically abusive, demeaning upbringing, and just a heap of physical violence. And so, some questions I have for you is, does he acknowledge his history? How's that playing out? Does he acknowledge the pain that he's gone through? Has he really embraced and recognized his trauma or the level of difficulty and pain that he suffered and the fears that have come from that as a child? Has he sought help and guidance in the past around this? Because this determines how he's seeing himself and how he sees himself in relationship. The reality is that relationships for us are almost replicas of what we experienced in our childhood with our primary caregivers. And it can be really challenging for us as human beings being in a relationship, trying to navigate our way around to distinguish between that love of the primary caregiver that we did not receive and the love that we're receiving from our beloved, from our intimate partners as adults. And the psyche almost becomes fragmented and fractured, particularly when we've experienced disharmony, disconnection, discontinuity, a lack of love in our upbringing, violence or difficulty and challenge. And so when a man is traumatized young, he often will carry that throughout his life and he'll isolate himself. And he'll isolate those parts of himself extremely, and to then be vulnerable with that and to show that in intimate relationship as an adult can be very, very challenging. Now, these aren't excuses. Okay, I had to do my work. I made many excuses up until 6-7 years ago where I decided to not use my past as an excuse, not use the unconscious ways of being and the belief systems that I formed and the suppressed fears as an excuse anymore. And I want to give you some insight and give all of us some insight into how we operate and how that actually affects who we are. And so this violence that sometimes we experience, or aggression, particularly for men, it attacks our sense of masculinity, which indirectly and directly attacks our sense of self. And so we'll either lash out to the world and we'll become what we experience, or we'll massively withdraw. And both of these coping strategies are antisocial. Both of these coping strategies don't serve the promise of a flourishing, open, loving, connected, intimate, transparent, honest relationship. Let's face it. There's a question here and I just want to address it. Just went through this, really slapped me in the face. All of the issues I thought I healed. It broke my heart, but I'm healing and really trying to open up. So it wasn't a question, a statement, but thank you so much for sharing. Really appreciate that. And so when you're asking about, when you're telling me that your man is rough around the edges, I also want to ask you, are you in your compassion? Now, this comes with boundaries, not your expression of compassion, but how you are allowing yourself to be treated. But can you still come from compassion, have an open heart? Because this is so, so important in terms of breaking down that masculine armor that has been he's developed to protect himself. That's what I did. I developed this massively thick armor. I became sarcastic, I became aggressive, I became frustrated. I would bite at someone the moment I thought or felt or even smelt that I was being attacked. And I would attack first to protect myself because of what I experienced as a child. And when we understand that and we slip into that compassionate, empathetic, understanding space, what generally happens is we diffuse that situation. And a man's heart can really open up. And if it wasn't for the compassion of the feminine that I experienced in my life, from mentors, from women in my life, from my mother, from partners as well, previous partners, I would not have been able to crack open that armor and really step into my authentic power, essentially. So when you're asking around the relationship is suffering and we're having a really hard time communicating. And of course, when there's this level of tension, you're going to have this difficulty in communicating. And ask yourself, what is the specific struggle around communication? Where are you really coming from? Are there fears that you may have that are coming into the relationship? So for example, we often attract familiarity. We attract what's familiar. The ego likes that because it's safe. And so we attract almost similar circumstances in our lives. And so did you potentially grow up with a suppressed voice where you're having a really hard time communicating now? Is this similar, this intimate relationship similar to you? And is this an opportunity for you to step into your power, to your authentic power, in a compassionate way, of course, in an understanding way, and be in that beautiful feminine compassion, and also speak your truth, and really speak your truth at opportune times, speaking your truth when there's some level of calmness in the relationship. And that's a tip as well, because you asked for some tips, and I'll come into this as well. And there's a question here. In addition to compassion, what is another quality you think a woman could bring forth to a man that's been through traumas? Understanding, not guilting and shaming. There's an interesting thing about emasculation. Emasculation comes to play. In other words, I speak to this often. It's not about not questioning your partner. I believe that we should question everything in life and really get clear on what our values are. It's about not over-questioning and having trust and faith that he's making the right decisions. But that also comes with a caveat, because if those decisions that he's making are harmful to you, you've got to get the fuck out. And that's the truth of it. You can still hold compassion in your heart, but you've got to remove yourself from that situation. And so coming with a trust, a deep trust of your man, but he also needs to be showing you that it's a reciprocal dance. It takes two to tango. And so he needs to be demonstrating to you that he's taking action that's in alignment with what you both want. And so trust is really, really important. Space. But again, it depends on the individual. Looking at people's love languages can be really, really effective as well. And then communicating in those love languages. And you can do the test on lovelanguages.com, something along those lines. And those are some starting points to begin to communicate a little bit deeper. And so another aspect to this was, I feel like I'm trying really hard to work on myself to let go of my own bad patterns, but I don't see an effort on his side in terms of him working on himself so we as a couple can thrive. And so those are your values. And so your values are, okay, for us to thrive, we both have to be working on this. I share the same belief as well. And as a big capitalized and there. And you can also see massive change in the relationship by simply focusing on you. And it does require effort and willingness from both parties. And can you also detach, not be attached to the outcomes of the actions of others? Otherwise, those actions become overly conditional and we become, in a sense, codependent. And so now we are relying on the actions of others to make us feel a particular way, to make us feel better about the relationship, to make us feel that we're in the relationship and that he's doing work and that we're sharing together. And so we have to be mindful of that. And so the focus needs to be on ourselves. And I'll come into this and I'll talk into this in a moment. So let me go back to this. What are tips to get across to a man who seems stagnant? Okay, this is loaded, right? So some questions to ask yourself and to ask him and to observe in the relationship. Is he inspired? Is he living his values? Is he living his truth? Has he stepped into his purpose, and is he happy with himself? Is he able to healthily express himself as a man? is he willing to go where it's probably really uncomfortable? And does he actually want to shift that stagnation? You can't force change. If you try to force change, you're going to really struggle. The best that you can do to start with is lead your own life. Lead your life in a way that inspires you, and then he may take action. He may be inspired to also take action. Now, if he doesn't, and you do that over a period of time and you're living your truth and you're congruent and transparent in who you are, and he's still stagnant, that becomes a different conversation. Maybe that's a conversation of, well, maybe we need to break up, or maybe we need to do something radically different. But before you get there, you have to go into those self-perpetuating states of inspiration and really be connected to your power and your truth. I would also think about, in terms of a tip and a strategy here, is have a third-party intervention. Together and separately, because this would be really useful. And this is something that I did massively in many of my relationships, especially the one that was a catalyst for my own growth about 6 years ago. And I learned so much. I grew so much because of that. I mean, I had shamans, spiritual healers, psychologists, counselors, energy workers, and that's maybe what you need too. And that accountability that is regular can really help both of you see a different perspective. Because right now you're probably both emotionally charged and you're too emotionally invested in the relationship and in each other and in yourselves, in your own fears, in your own pain, in your own struggles, in your own happiness. Whereas a third party, a shaman, a healer, a psychologist, they can see the world very differently. I'd also start really thinking about spending intimate time together on a regular basis. Have date nights, daily walks together, really bond and connect. In other words, create happiness and joy in your life. Share your goals and aspirations of being in a relationship. Get really clear of what your values are in the relationship. That is so important. Identify that with clarity. Have fun together. Get clear on what the purpose of the relationship is. And this isn't to distract you from the negativity or the difficult aspects of the relationship. It's to bring spaciousness into the relationship whilst you're still working on that stuff. So you're allocating time to work on that stuff. You're allocating time to have conversations around the challenges that you're facing in relationship. You're allocating time to have deep, struggling conversations. Maybe it's half an hour every second day to just go deep and have a difficult conversation with each other. Maybe that's what it is. And you can allocate that and you have those agreements. So you create those agreements with each other in relationship. And by doing so, you're setting boundaries and standards of how you want to relate to each other. And then what you need to do, which is often the difficult part, is adhere to those challenges or those ways of being that you want to implement into the relationship. Another beautiful tool or practice is transfiguration or eye gazing, and allocating a few minutes every day to just gaze into each other's eyes and have a 30 second to 60 second hug that actually means something. Share that oxytocin. Really go deep there. Do something nice for each other. This can all really help. And definitely stop blaming and shaming. Every time you point a finger to someone, before you do that, here's a strategy. Take a few deep breaths, take a few minutes, go for a walk, have a big glass of water, detach from what's just happened, and objectively ask yourself, is it really true what's happening right here and right now? And what would love do now? What would love do right now? And what's my role in this? And diffuse that charged emotion that you have within you, and then communicate that to your partner. Because that in and of itself, it brings you closer together instead of isolating you. And then you're focused on how the message is being delivered instead of the quality of the message. That's really important. So take ownership, stop blaming. Just know that relationships take time. They take work, they require effort, and they require presence from both parties or from multiple parties, depending on your relationship dynamic and the way that you relate sexually, emotionally, lovingly, etc. with your relationships. So beautiful people, blessings to you. Thank you so much for being here. Keep those questions coming in. I'll always answer them. I will get to them. It just takes a bit of time. Thank you so much. I'll see you again soon.